Hi, I'm Ben.
And I'm Josh.
And this is the Bad at Magic podcast, a podcast about games, life, and other things. And welcome to episode 50.
Episode 50. Ben, this is a big episode for people that love twos, people that love fives, and people that love tens.
Yeah, very good. Yeah, this tends to be the anniversary that people celebrate the most.
I can understand that because, again, people have an irrational attraction to numbers that deal with fives and tens. And then also I can see anniversaries in sets of 10 higher than this become less and less frequent. For example, like your 60th anniversary is a lot less likely to happen than your 50th anniversary.
It's nice big round number that most people could probably attain in a lifetime. But beyond that, the numbers start to taper off.
Well, talking about anniversaries, 50 is typically the gold anniversary if you're married. But,
nice.
But you and I are not married, and this is not a golden podcast, I don't think, by any stretch. But so I'm going to go with this. The atomic number of 10 is 50. So this is our 10 episode, Ben.
That's great. I wish I'd known and I'd got like the Bad at Magic logo done in tin.
Yeah, so it would be... I actually don't know anything about tin. I don't know if it would be corrosion-free or corrosion-prone. I think for our podcast, it should be a very corrosion-prone logo in steel or metal or whatever.
Yes. Yeah. Kind of rusty and tarnished.
Yeah, exactly. Oh, look at the Bad at logo.
Now, I owe a correction from last time. I made a reference to the movie A Christmas Story, and I talked about Ralphie getting his decoder pin, but I said something else. I can't remember what it was, but it was a Little Orphan Annie decoder pin for anyone that cared and yelled at their podcast for that.
Okay. Well,
I don't even know what I said.
I am not going to go back and correct anything I said in the previous podcast episodes because we don't have that
how
kind
very
of time.
like you. Yeah. All right. So I am coming to you from Louisiana.
I thought it sounded slightly more humid on your side of the recording.
Yeah, it definitely is. So I am in a government temporary lodging facility because we had arranged in advance for the house we were going to rent, but we couldn't get it until next week. So we arrived down here. All of our belongings are in a U-Haul truck that's on the other side of this building. I am in my car out in the parking lot, hoping the Wi-Fi holds up. And my family is in what used to be enlisted dormitories where there was a shared bathroom.
Oh, fun.
Yeah, so our whole family has one bathroom, one tiny kitchen, a bed, and a hide-a-bed for the 6 of us. It's tight.
That sounds awful. You couldn't get 2 of those?
Yeah, I tried. They couldn't get me one for the whole time, and they started trying to piecemeal it together, like you can move in here and move out and then move into something, or your kids will be across the street over the way. No, none of that was working for me.
For 4 days? This is ridiculous.
No, it's just the time, it's the time of year when a lot of military guys are moving and going in and out of TLF. And it's funny, this is a great example of how spotty it can be, because this is a historic base with a 4-star major command at it, so it's not a minor base. But it is smaller than Scott, and Scott has an old military housing area that they stopped housing military in. Instead of just knocking them down, they converted them into temporary lodging facilities just for this kind of thing. So when we were there, we had a 3-bedroom house with a washer and dryer in it. As we were leaving for a week. That's where we were living. And then we came down here and we're in a converted dormitory that looks like it was constructed in the 60s.
Well, don't knock the 60s. That was a good era for a lot of people. But this is very government. This is very waste not, want not. Like if this was a private organization, they probably would have torn that down and renovated it twice by now.
Yeah, I'm looking out the window at the first story, and apparently, I don't know what, of course I can't know what, but there's orange construction fence around the first level. It says danger, warning, safety, hazard area, and I don't know what's happening on the first level. It was condemned, maybe?
I'm convinced the government or the civil engineering squadron or whoever just throws stuff like that up randomly and leaves it there for like a month just to see if people actually obey it.
Yeah, to me, it's more like the Occam's razor story here is that I'm living in a building that rightfully should be condemned, but they don't have anywhere else. So they're just holding it along as long as possible, and I'm in the last remaining units. We'll move out, and after us, they'll condemn it and knock it down.
Well, as long as the asbestos stays in the ceiling for the next week, I think you'll be
That's
okay.
right. It's just got to make it through one more summer PCS season.
All right, well, welcome to Louisiana. It sounds terrible.
Yeah. I wanted to kind of land the plane on my summer vacation. We went all over creation and stuff like that. Now, just the last week that I was in Utah, there was a Disc Golf World Championship. I know that sounds like nonsensical, but I'm bringing it up for a reason. So, I've been getting more and more.
I know you've been getting into disc golf, and so I imagine with the couple weeks worth of practice that you qualified and that you participated. So how'd you do?
You would think so, but little do you know, Josh, but this is an iceberg of a sport. And out there are professional players that are really, really good. I know because I played on a few of the professional level courses this week, and I can't even get it to the hole in whatever par for the hole is. I can't throw far enough.
Oh, well, be careful then. You don't want to hurt yourself.
Well,
you can't be out there competing with these 20-year-old professionals.
They most of the high level pros are about that age, but it's like any sport, you start to go downhill at 35, and if you can develop all the skills by then, you'll be at the top of your form. Anyway, the reason I want to tell you this story is because it's very similar to a golf tournament in that they have a full day. They'll do 18 holes in a day, and they'll do it 4 days in a row. And at the end of the 4 days, it's down to just the last few guys that have the lowest scores, and you're kind of watching them as they're coming into the end. So on Sunday, on the last day, there were two golfers, Paul Macbeth and James. Oh boy, I can't remember his last name. Anyway, they're coming to the last hole, and the juggernaut, Paul Macbeth, is in the lead, and it looks like he's going to win. And things play out just perfectly so that the guy that's in second place is throwing just bad enough shots that the guy in first place isn't doing anything to press his advantage. You know what I mean?
Okay.
He's not trying to shut the door by taking risky shots. He's taking safe shots.
Okay.
So they get to their position where they're at the hole. They're looking at the hole, and the guy that's in second place is down by a shot, and he's 250 feet away from the hole, and he has to throw it in order to force a playoff. And so the guy that's in first throws a safe shot, and then the guy that's in second throws it and makes it. He makes this impossible shot from 250 feet away around a tree into the sun in his face, just like it's impossible. It was insane, Josh. And he made it and forced a playoff, and they went to the playoff. What I'll do is I'll post a link of this video. If you're interested if I've interested you listeners in this at all, you should go check out the Disc Golf Worlds from this year. I'll link to it on YouTube. I'll put it in the show notes. It was mind-blowing. It was so incredible.
So that is an interesting story, and I'll go watch the video just for kicks and giggles. And I want to count how many people are there watching besides you, because I can see a YouTube video of two guys playing disc golf with Ben in the background with a sign, just woo.
Okay, I'm glad that's what you're imagining, because this is going to blow your mind.
Okay, well, and this is the other thing I'm thinking as you're telling this story, is that we live in such a weird time in history, because just the dichotomy of you have there's so much excess at some parts of the scale that we have professional disc golfers that have dedicated fans to go watch them play a sport. That's got to be at the top tier of first world country problems as far as excess goes. And then at the other end of the spectrum, we have such disparity and people needing and wanting all of the things, and they can barely scrape by. I don't know. I for some reason my brain went there that this is such a weird time in history.
I don't know, man. I mean, okay, we're going to talk today in our feature for the second hour. We're going to talk about games and what makes games fun. And disc golf has a lot of elements of what makes games fun. Because, there's professional eating. If you turn to ESPN this week, you watched this cute little girl from Louisiana win the Scripps Howard National Spelling Bee. There was a time when you could watch Magic the Gathering on ESPN. I mean, what actually makes a sport interesting?
I mean, that's true. If you're looking at it from just a sheer entertainment perspective, people through all of history have always loved games. So, I mean, that's the thing.
Yeah, give it a chance. Give it a chance. Watch this video, see if it grabs you. But I'll tell you, I've probably played 30 rounds of disc golf in the last month, and I'm just having a great time. So I went and golfed a new course today that I'd never golfed today, and I golfed at 1 under. It was way easy, but I'm actually starting to get pretty good.
That's nice, and good on you. But do you actually call it golf? I went and golfed a course.
Yeah, I'm going for a round of golf. You use a lot of the same terminology.
Is that by intention? So that way when you're talking to other people who aren't disc golfers, they think you're doing actual golf, which may be a more acceptable sport in a professional environment?
You refer to your discs as drivers and putters. You call it the whole, there's... Yeah.
So basically disc golf needs to come out of the closet. Disc golf, you're your own thing. Like, just get your own words and people won't mistake you for real golf.
So I wrote an article for Magic the Gathering once that was about this, about how Magic the Gathering really wanted to be poker, and they use a lot of poker terminology in playing Magic.
Okay.
Did I ever show you this article I wrote about poker terminology in Magic?
Now, Ben, to my defense, you write a lot of articles. I don't know if I saw that one specifically.
I'll dust it off. Maybe we can make a Ben's random thoughts on our website, and I could put that one up.
You cannot write another thing your whole life and have plenty of content for that.
Yeah. Anyway, I think Magic is to poker what disc golf is to golf. They're similar. They're definitely borrowing from one another. The idea came from somewhere else. But the thing I love about disc golf that makes it so accessible is you can just grab a couple of discs. The courses are free. It's just so much lower of a barrier to entry. Beginners can do pretty well. People tend to be familiar with that skill. Like swinging a golf club can be so frustrating. You just miss the ball or it goes off into the woods.
So when I was at the academy, golf was a required PE class that you had to pass in order to graduate?
No, I did not know that.
Yes, it was. There was a handful of required mandatory PE courses. The other ones you got to pick, but golf was one of the requirements, along with swimming and I think racquetball.
That sounds like the kind of thing people would joke about academy cadets. Well, you go to the academy where golf is a required PE course.
We didn't say it like that, but yes, golf is a required PE course.
How did you do?
I got a solid B in golf because I tried really hard to get an A, but I have a slice that is so bad, the PE instructor had no clue how I was doing it.
And no choice but to mark you down a full letter grade.
Yes, exactly. Because he would stand behind me for half of the class, and I just hit this ball, and it would go perfectly straight for 50 yards, and then make a 90-degree right turn. And it was funny because I looked back at the instructor and be like, "Okay, Mr. Semi-Golf Pro, you need to explain to me what I'm doing to cause that to happen." And he's just one hand on his cheek, shaking his head, mouth agape, I have never seen anything that bad in the entire time I've been teaching golf at this place.
He gave you the Happy Gilmore speech, or not the Billy Madison speech about the quiz show.
Yes, it's we're all dumber for having
watched you hit that golf shot.
Yes, it's you are making me worse at golf. Please do not come back to this class.
Awesome. All right, there's one other thing I want to wrap up from this summer, and that is I just spent a month with my family. On my wife's side, on my side, and man, Josh, have I got a great family. I just love those guys. Every chance. So one of my siblings made a point to me, and it's probably similar to your life, in that when you live in the area where you're near your extended family, like your mom and dad and your aunts and uncles and cousins and stuff, when it comes time to go on vacation, you go away from all those people. But being in the military where I'm always far away, we do the opposite. We're always someplace exotic doing exciting things. And then when it comes time to take a vacation, we go back and see them. And I'm sure either way has its trade-offs.
I feel like you're waiting for me to insert some kind of snarky comment about family and my wanting to or not wanting to see them. But Ben, my family are in my immediate vicinity, and they're listeners to this podcast. So I'm going to plead the fifth on this whole conversation.
I wasn't trying to bait you into saying something disparaging about your family, but I know when you guys go on vacation, you go away.
Yes, and when we're home with family around, we also try to go away. We're when the family's doing stuff, we try to but there's stuff going on. Sorry, we can't make it. I've said before, I'm the black sheep of my family, where they're all extroverts and so good with people, and I am not that person. And so I will. This is a terrible thing to say, but introverts around the world, I think, are going to be a little sad when COVID is completely over, because man, that was just such a great get out of jail free card.
Yeah. I don't know. I don't know anyone that there wasn't at least one or two things about it that they're like, yeah, that was kind of nice.
What do you mean, like COVID?
Yeah, just so like for instance, that it proved that you could work from home when everyone said it was impossible.
It's true. It's absolutely true.
Or that we could actually go through almost a full calendar year without anybody getting like a cold or the flu. Like, I don't know anybody that's like, gosh, I really wish I'd gotten a cold this year. Or I really wish I hadn't proved that I could stay home without my soul-sucking commute and still get a full day's work done.
Yeah. That's an interesting topic. Maybe we should look into that for some discussion we could have in the future. The good things that came out of the global pandemic that killed a bunch of people.
All right. I like that idea. We'll put that one on the shelf. Now, I learned something new this week, Josh. I want to tell you, have you ever heard the joke? Well, let me just tell the joke, and then we'll get to the joke, what the concept is. All right. Okay. This is a joke about like going to scientists to try to get answers to life's problems. I'm just going to read this version of it. Milk production at a dairy farm was low, so the farmer wrote to the local university asking for help from academia. A multidisciplinary team of professors was assembled, headed by a theoretical physicist, and 2 weeks of intensive on-site investigation took place. The scholars then returned to the university, notebooks crammed with data, where the task of writing the report was left to the team leader. Shortly thereafter, the physicist returned to the farm, saying to the farmer, "I have the solution, but it works only in the case of spherical cows in a vacuum."
I have heard that joke before. And anybody that's taken like college physics like laughs at that joke, because that's like exactly like, here's the problem, but here are all the assumptions that don't conform to reality that you have to take into account.
We talked about this before, about how you gave your physics teacher a hard time for talking about eliminating friction.
Yes. It's like, oh, we have to ignore friction for this next part. And it's like, why am I even here?
But what I didn't know, and what I learned new about this, is you can refer to this whole concept by the short term spherical cow.
Oh, okay. So that joke is so pervasive that it's just part of the scientific community?
Yes. The term spherical cow is referring to oversimplifying something because you don't want to do the hard math.
Interesting. Okay.
So I'll add that to the Bad at Magic glossary, which if you haven't seen, you can go to badatmagic.live and check out the Bad at Magic glossary, where I put all of our logical fallacies, our biases, bad at English, and all of the terms like this that we cover for reference. If you always wonder in the future when Ben and Josh say spherical cow and you don't know what that's talking about, you can go look at the Bad at Magic glossary.
Man, Ben, that's a good plug for the website. Nice getting that in there. The other thing that I will say is I abhor this concept. As an accountant, there are no spherical cows that I'm allowed to use, because when you try to use spherical cows, people lose money.
Yeah. What's an example of a spherical cow in accounting?
Well, we do estimates, but we're always very cautious. Like, I will talk to somebody for 15 minutes about how they can't take this as strict financial advice. This is just off the top of my head. Total knee-jerk. Not something you should report to the IRS. This is a complete and utter estimation, not a direct quote. Please do not quote me on this. I will deny all knowledge of it, but it's about this.
I see. Wow. Have you been practicing that list of disclaimers? That was a lot.
Ben, I talk to people about their money. Man, I can't get enough disclaimers in my conversations with these people.
It's starting to leak into the rest of your life. You do this sometimes.
Well, I think that's a good habit to be in. It's like, everyone that is hearing my voice right now, you cannot trust a single thing I say. Even if I say I'm absolutely 100% correct about this, I am not 100% correct about this. Let's just keep that as the retroactive disclaimer on everything that I have or ever will say on this podcast.
Probably a good practice to be in. Now, maybe 3 episodes ago, I had asked you almost offhandedly if you'd seen Wonder Woman 84. And you're like, nah, I haven't seen it yet. And then this week you were texting me that you were watching it. And I was like, oh, because I was interested in your reaction. Now, has it been long enough that we can do like a spoilery review of Wonder Woman 84?
If we're gonna do like a full deep dive into Wonder Woman 84,
No, I don't want to do the deep dive. I just want to give it a real fast. Does it follow the laws? Is it hard or soft magic kind of thing?
I mean, we can do a short segment on it, but I would love to talk about Wonder Woman 1984 in great length because, spoiler alert, that movie is hot garbage from start to finish.
Yeah, it's really bad. So, and I'd seen it, and I think I told you don't bother, or you'd ask me if you should rush out and see it. I'm like, if you see it eventually, that's fine, but don't wait. Don't waste any money on it. Wait till it comes out on your favorite streaming service. Now, on the other hand, the Marvel drought has finally ended, and yesterday Black Widow came out, and I believe you and I have already both seen it.
Well, it was a Marvel movie, so of course. I mean, my family and I just watched it an hour ago.
Yeah. All right. Well, I am still thinking about it and enjoying it. It was fantastic.
I'm not going to say fantastic. It's up there. It's much better than it's light years beyond Wonder Woman 1984. It is a good movie to watch, but there's a couple of things where they're pushing a little too far on the suspension of disbelief for me. But other than that, no, it was very entertaining, very surprisingly funny. It was good.
When I think of it compared to like Captain Marvel, it just feels like it was significantly better than that too.
Yeah, it was significantly better than Captain Marvel, but for different reasons. Captain Marvel was kind of a storytelling mess, whereas you said you didn't want to do the deep dive, man. Captain Marvel has a lady that can fly and like tear through spaceships with her bare hands, and some of those action sequences were more believable than the ones that were in Black Widow.
That was excellent.
But the flip side,
and that's not a spoilery, anyone. If you've seen the trailer, you've seen what Josh is talking about,
right? And the flip side of that being, like we talked about, Captain Marvel is a storytelling mess, but Black Widow, despite the ridiculous action, was very well told and felt very genuine and real, and like this family was a real thing. So that was fun.
Yeah, I liked it. All right. Well, okay, so if you want to go see a superhero movie with a female protagonist and female girl power directed by a woman, go see Black Widow, not Wonder Woman 84.
Yeah, agreed. Wholeheartedly. Just avoid the entire DC universe. It's bad.
All right, let's do some bad at husbanding.
Well, I'm actually not bad at husband this week. I think I did very good by keeping my head down. So this must be your bad at husbanding.
Yeah, so we were in the car, driving somewhere, the whole family in the car. Probably, I think it was when we were coming back from Utah to Illinois to throw all our belongings in a truck and drive to Louisiana. And one of my kids said, "Mom, what would you say is the worst moment of your life?" And she got kind of quiet for a second, so I thought I would break the silence by speculating. And going through my mind of what the worst moments in my wife's life were, I thought about like the time as a child she was hospitalized and with like the flu or something, and she came out and she wouldn't talk to anyone for like 2 weeks. Or maybe when she broke her arm, or maybe the time she ran out of the gas on the freeway, or maybe the time she almost died in childbirth. And so I kind of listed a few of those out loud, and then I went, "It was probably something I said, wasn't it?" And she got really quiet and stared off into the distance. And I realized that it was probably something I said.
Well, kids, I'm not your mother, but I'm 100% sure that it had something to do with me.
Yeah. So I want to ask you the question, Josh. What if your kids asked your wife, what would she say the worst moment of her life was?
If my kids asked my wife what the worst moment in her life was, what would I say it was? Oh, jeez.
No, yeah. What would you?
I have to run my.
Say it was?
Yeah, I have to run my Nicole algorithm in my head. It's like, what's the worst experience that Nicole has ever had? I would probably say. I would say this. I don't think it's true, but I would say the first time I brought her home to meet my parents decided to throw a party with my entire extended family, and I abandoned her at that party so she to talk to all my female relatives while I was off doing something else without a second thought.
Oh my. Of course, at the time, you didn't know how disastrous that was going to be, or you hadn't thought it through all the way, but it turned out to be pretty bad.
No, I mean, like, I think that's facetious. I don't think that was actually the worst.
Okay.
Like, she's faced life-threatening illness and surgeries before, so I'm assuming talking to my extended family doesn't rank up with those.
Well, you know the old Seinfeld joke about how people have a greater fear of public speaking than they do at dying, so at their own funeral they'd rather be in the casket than giving the eulogy.
Yes, that is a classic Jerry Seinfeld joke. I will say that the funniest part of that whole scenario that I just described, where my prospective wife coming home, meeting my family for the first time, before that big extended family party, my immediate family, my brothers, my sisters, and my parents pulled her aside and was like, "Listen, the extended family's coming, and they're all weirdos. Like, they're just don't worry about them. Don't listen to them. They're crazy." And then when the extended family showed up, like two of my aunts and I think my grandma separately pulled my wife aside and explained to her, "Listen, we're all normal, but the family that you're being a part of are super weird. So just don't take that into account when you're thinking about all of us." Like, just both sides of the family pointing at the other as the crazy ones.
Doesn't everybody say a version of that the first time, though? It's like one of those things that when someone says you don't know what to think because you're assuming it in this like virgin context where you don't know anything about them. So you think, yeah, everyone says that, but then you meet them and you find out what they meant by it.
And you find out that both sides were equally crazy and they're just pointing at the other side without realizing it.
Yeah, I guess there's a qualitative homogeneity to it where just everyone says that and everyone's crazy in their own way. But every now and then you meet like an actual statistical outlier. I felt this when I read that book, To Be Honest. It was about the guy whose parents taught him to be radically honest, like always tell the truth about everything. And so he would like go to a job interview or go on a date with a girl and they'd be like, "So what's weird about you?" And he'd be like, I always tell the truth about everything. Like, "Oh yeah, everyone says they're really honest." And he's like, No, I tell the truth about everything. And then they run screaming in horror after, a date or two and they find out what that actually means.
Interesting. Yeah, and that goes into your thesis about how the little white lies that make society run.
Yeah. What if you just rejected all of them? Now, while
Ben, thanks for taking my funny anecdote and turning it into a very introspective analysis of social behavior. I appreciate the highbrow nature of this podcast.
That's what I'm here for. Now, while we're reversing roles and I'm the one bad at husbanding, I believe you have a versus bureaucracy segment.
I do have a versus bureaucracy. Like, I didn't know what else to name it. And Ben, I have to report it because it's such a crazy event that happened in my life because, Ben, I fought the Arby's drive-thru and the Arby's drive-thru won.
Oh, what? Okay, wait. Now let's pretend we've got some listeners that don't know because I think we introduced this pretty on. So if you don't know, Josh on the psychology spectrum is definitely a bit what? Oh crap! What's that one called? It's
It's called Screw Everyone Else. I think that's the official term.
Yeah. No, it's not called Screw Everyone Else. It's the one about whether or not you conform to the rules of society, and you don't in a lot of respects. And so one of the ways Josh has decided to do this is one time he went through a drive-through where they told him to pull forward so that they could, because he had a big order and they wanted to get the people behind him up to the window, and he did, and they forgot about him. And he's decided ever since then that when the minimum wage employee at the drive-through window looks at him and says, "Sir, will you please pull forward?" he just politely says, "No."
Yes, and that is traditionally what I do, and normally I get like flabbergasted stares like, "Oh, what do you mean?" And like, I'm not. Anyway, it normally works out fine. Like, I don't pull forward, I get my food on time, and then I leave. The way that drive-thrus
and
they
don't get the option to ignore you because you refuse to conform.
Right, and there's not. Yes, exactly. So it's maximizing my utility because there is going to be no delay. There's no having to rely on the cognizance and the presence of mind of a minimum wage, like teenage fast food worker to realize, oh, this order is ready. That guy's outside and he's waiting on it, and then bring it out to me all, Johnny on the spot. So
so what you're saying is you went to Arby's. How many people were in the car?
It was the whole family. So it was all four of us were in the car, and we ordered like I think it was a normal amount of food. I think we ended up ordering 6 sandwiches and 4 French fries. Like, we're not ordering for like a whole basketball team or anything like that. Nothing crazy.
So the total was like $30.
So, yeah, it was like $30. I think it was like 11:15. Like, it was a normal lunchtime. Like, we were expecting them to be ramping up for the lunch rush anyway, so it shouldn't have been a problem. And we were the only people there. Like, there was nobody inside. We were the only people in the drive-thru.
Wait a minute. There was no one behind you?
Nobody behind me. And they
asked you to pull forward?
This is the problem, Ben, I made my order. They told me the total. I pulled up to the window. I handed them my card. They processed the card, handed it back. And then she goes, okay, now please pull forward and we'll bring you your food. And I said, no, that's okay. I'll stay right here. And she goes, you need to pull forward for my time. And I said,
okay, so you thought of the story I told you about how they're being graded by their management and how fast they move you away from the window.
No, Ben, she said that to me right then at that time when I pushed back first. She like, no.
I know, but if I hadn't told you the story, would you have known what she meant?
Yes, absolutely. The only reason they have you pull forward ever
is to fog their statistics.
Yes, exactly. And I knew that the first time they had me pull
ever.
Forward. Yes, that's the only reason to do it.
No, you know this. You know this from handling trouble tickets. If you have a big trouble ticket in the queue and there's 40 small ones behind it and you wait until you finish the big one before you start the small ones, it's really bad service. But if you can move the big one out of the way, handle some of the small ones and still get the big one done, you just get better service. But since there was no one behind you, the only reason to do it is to fog the statistics.
I will agree to disagree with you on this point forever. The only reason that fast food people do this is to make it look like they're doing a better job than they actually are.
No, it's become okay. I could get it when it's done ad hoc, but there's corporateness behind it, where they actually have constructed the building so that it's easier for them to come out to the car after you pull forward. They paint lines on the ground. I mean, it's become an institution, not just a way to avoid the statistics. Stop
defending it. This is a terrible thing. This is not respecting first come, first serve, which is the foundation. Like, that was rule zero of civilization. Like, back when
so what was going through your mind? She looks you right in the eye and says, pull forward so that I can fog my statistics. And you were thinking what?
I was thinking, like, that's not my problem. This is what I was thinking. I'm like, she said, like, pull forward. Yeah, I need it for my time. And I looked behind me in both mirrors. I'm like, there's nobody behind me. It's not going to change the time. She goes, and then she leaned on both elbows in the window, looked at me and goes, you need to pull forward.
Holy crap.
And that's like, I'm usually the one that stonewalls people. I don't get stonewalled like this. And so there's also like a level of attitude that I was getting that like...
Yeah, wow.
Well, and she told me, like, just the body language and the tone and the way she was talking told me that I could keep pushing because she can't drive my car away, but it was going to become a problem. And I'm already vested because I've already paid. So I can't just storm off in a huff or like tell her off or whatever. I'm into this restaurant for $30 or $35. And then,
how fast was this little interaction?
This whole interaction took place probably 15 seconds.
Okay. Did Nicole get involved?
She didn't get involved.
But she knows your thing about this.
She knows my thing about this. What she did was when the lady said it that second time and was leaning down, clearly like ready to die on that hill, I got that the thing that all good wives do, and that is she said my name with the perfect tone and inclination to impart an entire conversation's worth of information to me in a split second.
Oh, Alicia does that so well sometimes.
It's a function of how well you know the other person.
Josh?
Yeah. All right, don't ever say it like that again. It wasn't that exactly, but is that kind of thing where, like, and then of course, then it's one of those like, if my life was a sitcom, that's when it would freeze frame and the record would scratch and then my voiceover would come on. It's like, it was at that moment that I saw two paths. I saw one path where I sat here on top of my moral values and not only fought the Arby's corporate system, fought this minimum wage employee and probably got my food all spit in, and then also fought my wife for no reason, or I could just pull forward and be minorly inconvenienced for some amount of time.
That was a very good weighted average change to your formula. Like, your formula is always stay there no matter what, and that was like, yeah, it's worse to stay here than it is to pull forward.
I'll tell you right now, Ben, only because my wife was in the car. Like if it was just me and the kids, it's like, listen, minimum wage fast food worker, you will not beat me at the who can be more stubborn game. You will not. And I was, Ben, it was bad. It was bad.
I can see this, but also you shifted the ball into her court where, like, now by pulling forward, you were letting her have the victory, and she was very motivated to just end it. Like, finish as fast as possible and bring your food out.
That's not what happened.
And not do anything adverse.
Well, she didn't do anything adverse. Nothing bad happened to my food, but at the same time, it took a full 15 minutes to get our food out to the car. And I can already hear Nicole from the future screaming, it wasn't that long. I don't know how long it was, but it felt like an eternity because, like you had said, I had to admit defeat to this minimum wage fast food worker. And it just, every moment of waiting extra just felt agonizing.
Like they were deliberately waiting?
I don't think they were deliberately waiting, but like it was bad enough that I made the dad joke. It was like, what, did they have to go kill the cow? And then I had
I make that joke all the time.
Well, then my son goes, oh, what's that mean? And then we had a conversation about butchering and like just how meat is made. Just so, it was a learning opportunity too. But
killed some time.
Yeah, but I shouldn't be able to give my kid an entire lesson on where our food comes from in the time a fast food joint is making my this is Arby's, all right? They're not making a filet mignon from scratch. It's a bun, it's sliced roast beef, which does not have to be cooked because it's already cooked, and another bun on top. Like, this shouldn't have been as hard as it was.
Well, I'm glad to hear that you have a threshold where you're willing to back down, but it sounds like you're really close to not doing it.
My threshold is if it's not just me, if it's other people, if it's my family, people that have my respect and my love, then of course I will kowtow to social convention and do the things that I'm supposed to do. If it's just me, Ben, oh no, societal norms can just go out the window.
Okay, now here's the difference between you and me. Let's say I decided that I was going to do your thing about not pulling forward when they asked me to, but if I'm the only one in the drive-thru and they're asking me to pull forward, I might have pulled a card on her that I think could have stopped her in her tracks.
What's that?
I'd be like, you just want me to pull forward so that you can trick your manager into thinking you handle my order faster than you did. And if you don't bring me my food, I'm calling your management and telling them about this.
Ben, like, that works if it's a trick or if it's a lie. Like, she told me flat, like, in her statement, like, this is what threw me off my game initially, is she said, for my time. Like, she's not even disguising the fact that she is just trying to work the system to make her look better.
Yeah, I hate that. And yeah, I hate that. I that's the kind of thing where I would totally turn into Karen and call the manager. Not the manager that's on shift right now, but like the franchise owner.
I almost got out of my car and went inside to, I don't know what I would have done. I probably, in reality, I would have stand there and looked slightly irritated. In my mind, I'd have gone in there and, like, kicked the entire countertop over and started screaming at the top of my lungs, but that doesn't.
All right.
Doesn't
Now,
happen.
I'm kind of aware that you and I are just sounding like entitled jerks right now. And I'm saying this from the perspective of somebody that used to work that job and used to have all the pressures that come along with it. But there is no reason to treat people like that. The reason the management is pushing you to improve your statistics on how quickly to handle customers is because of the end result of it. That you, by quickly providing customer service to customer, you have a more satisfied customer who's more willing to come back. But if you're just fogging the statistics to get management off your back, you're not improving anything for anyone. And the customer's not being served, the company's not being served. It's not helping anyone.
I wholeheartedly agree with what you said at the end, where it's not helping anybody. I wholeheartedly disagree with your motivation. You're coming at this with the assumption that the management and corporate are all motivated to provide better service for the customer. And I think that's absolutely false. I think the manager is incentivized, probably fiscally, to have better statistics on average over a long period of time than to have worse statistics. I think he probably gets a bonus based on stuff like customer satisfaction or customer service speed or whatever, and he probably passes that on to his employees, which would be the only reason that they care about it.
Not just that. I mean, I've worked a lot of these kinds of jobs, Josh. They genuinely believe that when you provide better better customer service to your customers, they return and give you more business and refer their friends and don't, give you bad Yelp reviews. It's just, it's cyclical.
All right, so a manager might understand that and might be motivated to do that.
And they try to imbue it into their culture, not just by doing like hollow things like telling you don't have enough flair on your uniform.
Oof, you have way more faith in humanity than I do.
Why is this faith in humanity? This is just a business trying to be a better business.
I know, but it's impossible to impart like strategic values into a teenager that's there to get his paycheck so he can go to the movies on Friday night.
Maybe the reason I sound like this now is because how hard they tried to indoctrinate me with this stuff then worked.
Well, I mean, you are super. You live in a super indoctrinated like career. Like you were a teacher before this, which like if you're not intrinsically motivated to teach, there is not very much external motivation to teach. Then you join the military, which is all about drinking that Kool-Aid, man. So I think you just might be indoctrinated to do your best and not get paid for it because that's the right thing to do. And maybe over the course of your life, you've spun that and justified it in weird different ways, but that's not a problem. That's just part of what makes you you.
Maybe you're right. But we don't need to take our insecurities out on poor, unsuspecting fast food workers.
I wasn't my insecurity. I didn't want to wait for my stupid food. I
wasn't talking about you. I was talking about me telling the regional manager that the employees faking their drive-through statistics.
Oh, did you tell on your boss that did that with the coffee pot?
No, I didn't.
That guy deserved it. He sounds like a jerk.
Yeah.
All right. So yeah. Anyway, I fought the Arby's drive-thru, and the Arby's drive-thru won.
All's well that ends well. You got your food.
I did, and it was delicious.
All right. This is the Bad at Magic podcast, and occasionally we talk about magic. So you had a topic you wanted to touch on related to Magic the Gathering. What do you have for us?
All right. So I thought this was going to be an interesting thing to broach. Because of the dichotomy that Magic exists in right now. So for those of you who don't know, Magic the Gathering is a card game. When I first started playing it, the only way really to play for real is you went and bought cards at a store, and then you built a deck with the cards that you physically owned, and then you sat down physically across from another human being, and you played a game of Magic. Well, it's 2021 now, and it's no longer the Stone Age, so we have two different digital clients where you can take digital cards that you can acquire through any number of ways, and play virtual games of Magic with another player. And this has led to this kind of back and forth conversation of where Magic's future is, where the future of this game is. Because one thing that differentiates a paper card game from a digital one is that once the cards are printed, that's it. Like they can't be changed on the fly. Like you can change the rules for tournaments or whatever, but the cards are
it's one of those
printed.
Like inherent indelible assumptions about the game.
Yes. And so but one of the things is now there are card games that are completely 100% digital. A very popular one for mobile is called Hearthstone. It's made by the people that make World of Warcraft. And I used to play that quite a bit. And it's a fun game. And one of the things they're very good at is if the metagame, if players are playing overly one deck more than another deck, or if specific cards are showed to be way too powerful and they get played way more than any of the other cards, or they're becoming too dominant in the game, they'll change them. They'll make subtle changes to either the mechanics or the costs or something, and they'll change it on the fly. And then you'll get a pop-up window one day. It says, oh, we've changed this card. And usually if it was a radical change, they would refund you some trivial amount of in-game currency that would allow you to replace the card with another one. So it's like no harm, no foul kind of thing. And then it would rebalance the game and make the game fun again. So
yeah. So let me try to restate your thesis in a little bit different way. So with Magic, there's this fundamental assumption that what's happened is you're collecting trading cards, and so if they accidentally print one, and they try really hard not to, but if they accidentally print a card that's unbalanced and that causes something unhealthy to happen in the game that's harmful over all the players, the only lever they really have on their console is to just ban or restrict the card so you can't play it in the constructed formats.
Right, and this has happened in the past. Like, when I first started playing Magic, there was a couple of cards that they printed that I don't know if they were mistakes or they slipped through design process or whatever. They turned out to be way too powerful, and they banned the cards, so they couldn't be played in tournaments. And so you really just couldn't play it at all, because like, oh, well, that card's banned, everybody knows it. But now that...
So,
Oh, go ahead.
well, I was just going to say what you're saying is that in other games, they've shown that there's other levers to pull, but because Magic is inherently a collectible trading card game, they've been reluctant or even hadn't considered it a possibility to have other levers. And now you're saying that they're actually starting to toy with the idea that there's another lever that they could throw to fix unbalance in the game's problem.
You're jumping ahead of me a bit, but yes, that's kind of where I'm getting to, is because previously... Magic has been very, very strict in that whatever you do in paper, you also do in the digital client. So if the card is banned, it's banned everywhere. You can't play it in tournaments in paper. You can't play it in tournaments on the digital client. But they just had this one-shot event that was lasted like 4 or 5 days. It was last week, and it's called the Mirror Mirror event. And they did this because there's actually been a handful of cards. This last year, they printed like 5 or 6 cards that are just way too powerful, and they had to ban them in tournament play. But instead of... So this event, this event only, they took a handful of those cards and they changed them subtly. A little tweak here, changed the mechanic there, and they had quote-unquote fixed versions of these 2 powerful cards that you could only play in this event. And so there was a lot of speculation on both sides of whether this was just a fun thing that they had the opportunity to do because they have a digital client, or if this is the manufacturer kind of testing the waters of, well, maybe we could just adjust these things in post, or fix them after the fact, and maybe people would be open to that.
Now, I understand why they're reluctant to do this, because it's really problematic. Basically saying that a card that's been printed just represents the idea of that card, but the actual rules of the card aren't what's written on it.
Yes, and that is also complicated by the fact that these cards have real-world value. I'll harken back to an episode we had probably a year ago now, where there was a card that was printed, Oko Thief of Crowns, that was so broken in every single format that its value skyrocketed. And Ben, you bought a playset, if I recall.
I bought I think I have 3 copies of it, and I got them at like $35 a piece or $30 a piece.
Man, so you're almost $100 into this card, and then it was like a couple weeks later that they banned that card in every single format.
Every format. It's every format.
So what happened to the value of that card after that, Ben?
It went down to like $10, which is amazing that it retained any value at all. I guess people were still just keeping it for like commander decks or casual Magic or stuff like that.
So there you go. So you are $100 into a card that is now essentially worthless to you. But,
it went from 100 to 30. But
at the same time, so now, if they had the opportunity though to fix the card, like make an adjustment to a couple of its abilities, and now it's playable again, you've already got copies of it. So I mean, you could theoretically.
So what are you suggesting that they were doing with this Mirror Mirror event?
So I don't know where I land in the speculative format of this, because I can see it from both sides. One, that's a very powerful tool to have in order to kind of fix any of your mistakes, is to be able to go back, make adjustments. And you could even like use the digital as a testing ground, because there's millions of games of Magic being played every day.
So for a digital copy online, you can just change it so that whenever that card comes up, it just has the new text on it.
Yes, and not only that, but then you could do it like quote-unquote a special event and just gather data. It's like, oh, if we were to change this card and fix it, 1, how would it show back up in the game? And 2, would people be receptive to that? And then maybe you could print or put out in the real world, hey, yea, verily, we have decided that what is printed on this card is no longer correct. It is actually this card now. The problem being...
there's a memory problem.
Yeah, the problem with that being, if you're a new player, you have no idea of the competitive environment, and you open up these cards and you see the card that as it's written, you think it does this. And without realizing that, oh no, actually you have to go to a website and check every card that you own, essentially, to make sure that it matches what has actually been printed.
Yeah, and that sounds really overwhelming. So I assume if they'd ever try to do that kind of thing, they would have to be really judicious about it.
I believe that there's ways that they could do it if they were willing to make the investment, but it's a huge cost versus benefit thing. Like, for example, what if they fixed Oko Thief of Crowns to have new text and make it viable in the format and said, hey, if you have a copy of Oko Thief of Crowns, send it to us in the mail and we'll send you back a corrected print version of it. Would you be down for that, Ben?
I kind of would, but then there's this weird thing that happens in collectible markets where now if people start doing that, if I hang on to the old ones, they go up in value.
Wizards has said time and again that they're not overly concerned with the secondary market because, I mean, really, how could they be?
I get it.
But
then there's an opportunity cost for me sending it back. Yeah, I would get a playable copy in return, but the one I send back now has gone up in value because it's become more rare by virtue of the fact that other people are sending their duplicates of it back.
Okay, well, and then the other conversation here then, not just about fixing cards in post, because if they're going to maintain the printed version, I don't think it's realistic. There's too many costs and there's too many problems, and it creates too many barriers to entry for new players. And Magic already has really high barriers to entry.
Yeah.
So, but now the other...
and they're concerned about that.
They are, absolutely. The other problem that I can see with it is the question of, well, is Magic a paper card game that has an online client, or is Magic an online game that has a paper version?
I like where you went with that, because there could reach a tipping point. And just the fact that they're even considering this shows that they're starting to have that identity question.
Well, and I mean, it all comes down to the spreadsheets when it comes to the corporate masters. Like, how much do we earn from printing and selling the paper cards after expenses versus maintaining this online infrastructure where people can literally pay us all of their money at any time of day?
Yeah. And the opportunity cost of like, well, if we make this change and fix it, that fixes the problem with the overall game that's pushing people away, as opposed to worrying about a few people that have collected this card. And in the kind of X factor of losing trust in your player base who have collected something that's now losing value because of the decisions you're making.
I mean, but they kind of do that anyway. Like, you are $100 into a card that is not playable.
Yeah.
It's just, okay. Anyway, the reason I wanted to bring it up is because it brings up a lot of interesting questions, and it gives you a glimpse on the inside of the manufacturer's side that they are kind of toying with this idea that they have this digital format that doesn't necessarily have to conform to the limitations of the physical media. Now, that all said, I want to make sure I am perfectly clear that I like the digital clients, but paper Magic to me is king. Like, there is nothing like sitting and playing with actual cards in your hand. And I don't know why, but that's how I grew up playing it. And man, that is my preferred method of play.
I wonder if they could make a clean break between the two, because they draw so much off of each other because there's so much that goes into the creative, process of creating the cards that the digital one can benefit from. But if they just start making decisions that are better in digital and cause problems for playing in person, that seems like it would really be parasitic.
You know what solves this problem? Is those clear tablet things from Minority Report that we reviewed a couple episodes back. If all the cards were just on like clear little pieces of plastic that could be updated digitally, then there would be no problems.
Well, I don't know. That feels kind of steampunky to me.
Hang on a second.
Like, why are we still manipulating physical objects if we're just doing this all digitally?
Okay, hang on a second, sir, because there was many years back. This is probably at least 10 years ago. I think it was on the PlayStation 2 or the PlayStation 3. They had an attachment. It was a webcam that you could plug into your PlayStation, and they had a paper card game that had QR codes on all of the cards and a special playmat that had everything placed just so. And if you set it up perfectly and you got onto this game and you could go into a digital client and match up with another player, you would play the cards physically and the camera would register them and do kind of an augmented reality for the cards as they were sitting on your thing while you're playing against the other person. So you're saying like this
was it a big hit?
Oh no, it failed spectacularly because it required you to have extra peripherals, a random deck of cards that you could only buy at certain places, and then another person that was crazy enough to set all this crap up and sit in a queue waiting for somebody to match against.
Yeah, that's how I used to feel as a kid when Nintendo invented the thing where you could connect your Game Boy Advance to your GameCube. And then you would need a special cable, and then you and three of your closest friends could all connect their Game Boy Advances. So you needed a console and 4 handheld consoles, and everyone in the same room at the same time is like the barrier to entry to playing a game.
I mean, that was less of a problem back in the day when you actually hung out with people physically.
Yeah, but it still felt like that. Like, okay, so if we want to play Legend of Zelda Link's Awakening and get the full experience, or whatever it was, I can't remember. It was the one where, like, all four of you could be playing together on the same screen, but you could also go off on your own and not be with the group.
Four Swords
Adventures, that's what it was.
Yeah, well, but what I'm saying is you called it like some steampunk future. Like, it has already happened. People have tried it in the past, and this technology is only becoming more and more ubiquitous.
Yeah.
I would be shocked if that didn't exist now, where you could like play Magic in an augmented reality on some weird third-party client.
You're right about you would be losing all of the intangibles of playing in person. The being able to look at your opponent, gauge their reactions, see if they make mistakes, read their tells, all those kinds of things. And you lose all of that with digital right now.
Yeah, there's an investment problem with digital. I don't know. It's nice that I can sit down and play a game of Magic whenever I want to, but it's not as good as an experience as if I busted out a deck that I really worked hard to make and then played it against the opponent.
Yeah. All right. Let's talk bad at logic. So I think it's my turn this week for a logical fallacy. So here in my deck, I have the logical fallacy, appeal to emotion. Manipulating an emotional response in place of a valid or compelling argument. This one's pretty easy to pick out compared to some of the others that we've had in the past. Basically, you're just trying to appeal to one of the big emotions like fear, envy, hatred, pity, pride, as almost a substitute for actual logic.
And the problem with this one specifically, Ben, is that it is so effective.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, there are so many instances in political speeches, like throughout history, where this is the predominant factor. Like the Nazi Germany comes to mind, where it's like, it doesn't matter if what I'm saying is right, I'm making you feel, and that's what's more important.
Yeah. The website says, appeals to emotion are a very common and effective argument tactic, but they're ultimately flawed, dishonest, and tend to make one's opponents justifiably emotional.
And this is usually the first step of a discussion, of a valid discussion or debate, breaking down into both sides just yelling nonsense at each other. Because once you cross into the threshold where we're now talking about how we feel, that has no real bearing on the problem or how to solve it. Because I'm sorry, everybody, your feelings are important, but your feelings don't get stuff done.
Yeah, and, I think one of the great elements of the legacy Star Trek crew, particularly the interaction between Kirk and Spock, where Kirk was doing everything emotionally and Spock was doing everything in this cold and calculated way, and they were kind of contrasting the two and realizing that one or the other isn't always superior, and that the right answer is kind of sort of between the two. There is a time for emotion.
Yeah, there's a time for emotion, but usually it's when you're drawing on a foundation for why you're making a decision, why you're making hopefully a logical decision.
Everything should always be done with the maximum amount of logic and understanding. Sometimes feelings need to be factored in.
I don't think that's true. I enjoy my life as a cold, emotionless robot. Big fan.
Thank you, Commander.
You are welcome.
Live long and prosper. All right, it's time for Bad at English.
Okay, what do you got for us today?
Well, sometimes when I was sitting in a meeting, they would be discussing like financial options for like funding a project or an IT upgrade or something like that. And someone would say, well, we could take that path, but that's swings and roundabouts.
Wait a minute. I think I know this one.
Really? What does swings and roundabouts mean?
Okay, so swings and roundabouts, I've only heard this in the context of what you gain on the swings, you lose in the roundabouts. So it's...
Yes, that's it.
Well, there you go. Like... It's there's no gain or loss out of it.
But what are swings and roundabouts?
Okay, so I don't know if this is correct, but when I've heard this, I heard it in the context of ancient cavalry maneuvers. Like if you have a formation of cavalry that is doing like swings or roundabouts, like that's how I've heard it.
That sounds like almost like a telephone game kind of it. The original genesis, the farthest back dated use of this is in a novel right around the turn of the 20th century in 1906 by P.G. Wodehouse. And in it, he refers to basically from the perspective of a carnival operator. And a roundabout in that context means a merry-go-round. And what you lose on the swings, you make up on the roundabouts means, if you have carnival rides, if there's one that's losing you money, you'll make it up on another one. But the underlying idea is simply gains and losses that offset each other. In American, sometimes I heard people say 6 of one, half dozen of the other.
Yes. It took me
same kind of idea.
Yeah. It took me a long time to realize that saying is 6 or half dozen and not 6 and 1/2 dozen or 1.5 dozen.
Huh.
Because then 6 is half a dozen, not 1.5 dozen.
Maybe they use that terminology in cavalry maneuvers, but I think it's referring to being a carnival operator.
So you have actual sources like that are legitimate. So I have.
I like that one though.
Well, I heard that in the context of a fantasy novel, so I can't really back it up. It's like, oh well, my fictitious book has evidence that points to this thing, so it's correct. But I can't.
Because when I asked my British friends what it meant, they said they thought roundabouts meant something like you drive through with a car, but they didn't know what a swing was in that context.
Well, it just goes to show you that these things get lost to time, but the sayings themselves stick around.
Yeah.
And that's one of those ones that's just fun to say. Swings and roundabouts.
Yeah, swings and roundabouts. All right, it's time for our main segment.
Whoa, man, we're burning through segments. Let's do it.
Yeah, so for this one, I want to go back to something we touched on in episode 29 of Bad at Magic. In episode 29 of Bad at Magic, we talked about what we call... Magic the Gathering has had the same lead designer for almost 30 years now. His name's Mark Rosewater. He's a brilliant guy who used to be like a writer in Hollywood. I think he wrote on The Simpsons, and... So he has an academic background, and he really applies his creative thinking and love for games. And the story he tells is that his daughter's class was doing a project where they were going to design a game in class, and they asked him as an expert to come to class and give a lecture to the class about how to design a good game. And so he actually put some thought into it, and he wrote a list he calls 10 Things Every Game Needs. He wrote a great article about it, actually 2 articles about it. I'll put a link in the show notes. And then he made this list of 10 that he went and presented to his daughter's class.
Very cool. Yes, I read both of these articles, and I have to agree with him. At a fundamental level, these are the things that you should be thinking about with every game that you play. And if you've played a bad game, you can point at one or several of these things and realize, this game might have been bad because it didn't have X, Y, and Z.
Great. So what I'd like to do, Josh, the approach I'd like to take is I'm going to read through the list real fast, just give an overview of what the 10 things are, and then maybe we'll pick a game or two that we can then measure against them, and then we'll go through them one by one.
Okay, that sounds fun.
Okay, so here are the 10 things. Number 1, a goal or goals. There needs to be a point for your game. What are your players trying to do? How do they win? I know that one seems obvious, but sometimes it could be taken for granted. Number 2, rules. There needs to be a list of what players are and are not allowed to do. Restrictions are an important part of a game. Accomplishing your goal shouldn't be too easy. Number 3, interaction. There needs to be some aspect of the game that encourages players to react to one another. What does your game do to make the players interact? Number 4, a catch-up feature. There needs to be a way for players that have fallen behind to catch up. A game becomes frustrating if a player feels he or she has no chance to win. Ain't that the truth? Number 5, inertia. There needs to be something in your game that moves it along toward completion. You have to have something built into your game that makes sure it ends. Number 6, surprise. There needs to be elements of your game that players cannot predict. People enjoy being surprised. You have to make sure your game has moments that are unexpected. Number 7, strategy. There needs to be something in your game that allows players to get better over time. The reason people like playing games, again, is that they want to use the knowledge from past games to do better in future games. Number 8, fun. There needs to be something that allows the players to enjoy themselves. The number 1 reason people play games is for entertainment. If your game isn't fun to play, people won't want to play it.
Looking at you,
Number
Monopoly.
9. Yeah. Whoa, we'll get there. Number 9, flavor. Besides having mechanics, a game wants to have a trapping. It wants to be about something. Sometimes this comes first and the game is built around it. Sometimes the mechanics come first and a flavor is found to match it. Either way, the games are more fun if the element of the game refers to a story, environment, or a theme. And number 10, a hook. If you want people to play your game, there has to be something about it that encourages people to want to try it. If you're selling your game, the hook is what you want to use to market it.
Excellent.
Those are the 10 things every game needs, and I wanted to establish a baseline of having shared those on the podcast so we can refer to them going forward in perpetuity.
Like the Sandersonian laws for storytelling, exactly. These will be our 10 things to grade games against.
Right. So if we're saying I didn't like that game, we should be able to refer to one of these 10 things as a reason why.
I don't like that game because it's not fun. That's going to be my first thing every time.
Well, I'd written next to that one that it's kind of subjective, but let's go through them in order. So the first one is a goal or goals. Now, as we do these, did you have one in mind you wanted to kind of like measure against everyone? You'd already mentioned Monopoly.
So this the thing is, I have a breadth of experience with different games. And so when we talked about this offline, like I thought that we were going to do a deep dive into a handful, and I tried to pick a couple that like showed different aspects of each one. But apparently, if that's not what we do, that's fine. But as far as goals go, there's a lot of good examples of this and a lot of bad examples of this. Like, for example, a good example is most early NES video games. The goal was to move right and beat the boss or save the princess or something. It usually said it right on the box. Like, there's a bad guy, there's the reason I'm trying to kill the bad guy, and then there's me. And that's it. That's your stated goal. Like, defeat the enemies. Ready, go.
Yeah, I think that's part of the reason Monopoly is such a bad game, because the goal, I think, in Monopoly is that everyone else loses.
So I have said this before, but the person who invented and trademarked and patented Monopoly, they invented the game as deliberately to be a bad experience to showcase that capitalism is bad. This was at the time in American history where people were pushing really hard for socialism.
Okay, well, this is why. Because the goal is to make sure everyone else loses.
The goal is to be frustrated and angry the entire time. And like it is built and designed that way.
But the person who wins isn't frustrated and angry. They're rolling in the dough.
The person who usually wins is frustrated because they're not winning fast enough. Have you ever played a game of Monopoly where it came down to one person who owns 3/4 of the board and one other person that just keeps on landing on the railroads that he owns, and he won't land on your property with the hotels and just lose already? He's lost the game.
Yeah.
He's not conceding, and it's ridiculous.
Yeah. All right. Well, what are some good examples? One that came to mind is a game that we acquired recently called Escape. And it's in the genre of players versus game, in that the game is set up in such a way that you kind of discover the board as you play, and then there's a time limit, and you're basically like in a Indiana Jones-esque treasure temple, and you're trying to get out before the time limit's up, and you're trapped inside and everyone dies. And so you're in a race to get out, and it's really exciting, and the goal is right there in the title of the game, Escape.
Nice. I like that. I mean, most good games, I'm not even going to say that. Most games have clear goals. Like, if you don't have a clear goal, are you even a game, or are you just something you piddle around with? I will tell you right now, one game that drives me nuts because it doesn't have a clear goal is Minecraft. And so I remember I bought the Java version of Minecraft for my computer. Oh man, Ben, this is before I was married. This is before I met Nicole. This must be like 15 or 20 years ago now. And I probably played Minecraft for, 10 hours straight on the Saturday that I bought it in the morning. And at the end of that 10 hours, I literally let go of my keyboard and go, what am I even doing? Like, this isn't fun. And then I stopped doing it. The game is just open world, do whatever you want, make stuff. And the game just has you decide what your own goals are. But it didn't give me any goals externally.
Okay, good. This is why I'm glad that we're giving counter examples. Minecraft is a great example of one that doesn't meet this first thing that every game needs as a goal. It's just this open world sandbox. So it doesn't really have a goal. And yet it is the best-selling video game of all time.
Yeah, which, I mean, hooray! It is a great expression of freedom, but I don't particularly enjoy it after a certain number of hours that I play.
So I'm going to kind of add to Mark Rosewater's theorem that these are 10 things every game needs, but if you have a reason for not having one of the 10 things, you can do without it. And this is an example. Minecraft doesn't need a goal. It's just an open world sandbox, and it's the #1 selling game of all time.
Well, is it even a game or is it just a work simulator? Who knows?
Okay. Well, the second thing that every game needs is rules. Now, again, this one seems almost as obvious as a goal. It can't even be a game if it doesn't have a goal, and how could it be a game if it doesn't have rules? But the rules are the restrictions towards achieving the goal. They're the 88 miles per hour and the 1.21 gigawatts of games.
Gigawatts. But yes, I understand what you're saying. These are the rules create the boundaries in which you must achieve your goal. And it's real tricky to get that right because the rules can't be so constricting that there's only one clear path, and then you feel like, well, you're just some computer executing just executing the problem without having to make any contribution to it. But they can't be so wide that things are open to interpretation, and like there's situations that could arise in the game that are not clearly defined in the rules, which then causes frustration and debate amongst the players. So
yeah, the comprehensive rulebook for Magic the Gathering is like 250 pages or something like that. And if you bought your starter deck of Magic the Gathering and it came with a 250-page rulebook, nobody would play.
No, absolutely not. That is the rules, and he even says in the article that the rules of Magic are its strength and its weakness because the comprehensive rules cover absolutely everything that could possibly ever happen in the game. But they're also incredibly intimidating the first time you see them.
Absolutely. Now, so I was trying to think of a good example of what's just a simple game. I think checkers is a good example. Like, hey, here's this grid, here's your pieces. We take turns moving the pieces. They can only go diagonally. When you jump over, you take someone else's piece off the board. Get everyone else's pieces off the board. Those are the rules.
Is that the
comprehensive There's a few exceptions in some other situations, but pretty much that's it.
I don't know, Ben. I feel like the rules for when you get a king and how the king moves, I feel like that's a much longer discussion for checkers.
Okay, but it's not that much longer.
No, I was just giving you crap.
Oh, okay. So I was trying to think of a bad example, and I think my wife brought up, have you read Calvin and Hobbes?
I've read a bunch of Calvin and Hobbes. I've probably not read all of Calvin and Hobbes.
Okay. Well, in Calvin and Hobbes, there's this recurring thing where him and Hobbes will go out and start playing a game, and it degenerates into what they call Calvin ball.
Yes, and they're just making up the rules
it starts
on the fly.
out. Yes, exactly. It starts resembling like baseball, but then they start adding things, and all of a sudden we're like bringing in outside things and changing the rules as you're running to the bases and using other kinds of balls, and it's just chaos. And it's hilarious, but it's a great example of why there has to be a common understanding of what the restrictions are on gameplay in order for a game to be workable.
Okay. Yeah, Calvin ball is a bad example of rules.
The third thing every game needs is interaction.
Yes, you must be. This is specifically, he was talking about interaction with another human because games are a social thing. I mean, you can play games by yourself, but a lot of people will say that their gaming experience is heightened by the interaction with other players. And so a good game would have good interaction. Whether it be cooperative or competitive, you're still interacting.
So, you gave the example earlier of NES games that had a clear goal, but almost exclusively, most good titles were just like a one-player game, and if there was anyone else there, they were just watching you play it. And sometimes, there would be good ones come along where you could both play, but there's a discussion to be had there about what is the interaction if you're just playing like a one-player campaign of a first-person shooter. As opposed to being in an open world multiplayer online thing.
Well, if you're talking specifically about those first-person shooters, there are many, many examples in the modern day where, like, top brand AAA titles like Call of Duty will ship a game that doesn't even include a single-player option. Like, it is just multiplayer because there are a ton of people that see multiplayer as the more fun portion of that.
Right, and they're relying on this multiplayer aspect that another human could be better than any artificial intelligence they could ever program.
Which, currently, that is true. And if nothing else, humans will always take novel approaches to problems that an AI definitely won't.
Yeah. So I took... And I think there's an interactive element to a single-player game where you want a bit more of a curated experience and you're following a script and you want a maximum level as far as potential difficulty. Because, man, if you go on like Call of Duty Online and you end up, if you're not like if you end up in a room where you're against a bunch of really good players, it's not fun at all.
No, it's not. One thing I want to bring up that I think is interesting, that needs to be explored more, game developers, if you're listening, listen to this, is there are a handful of games that I've seen and that I've played that have asymmetric interaction. And so the example that I'm going to bring up is a game, Super Mario Galaxy for the Wii. Did you ever play that game, Ben?
Yeah, could you have like a person with another controller moving the little star around?
That's it, yes. So I played the primary player, which was Mario, which was doing all of the hardcore 3D platforming. And my wife, when she felt like it, she could jump in and play the second player, which her job was just to collect all the extra kind of stuff on the screen. And so it wasn't demanding from a gameplay perspective, but she was still contributing in a real way to achieving the goal of the game. And I thought that was very interesting because I am a hardcore gamer, but my wife is not. And so expecting her, like if they just dropped her as another player into this hardcore 3D platformer, it would just be a frustrating experience for both of us. But they gave her a way to interact with the game that was had a lower requirement level, but was still contributing in a way that I appreciated.
Yeah, I like that. And I agree that that's an underexplored area of gaming, the asymmetric interactive player experience.
Yes.
Another one that comes to mind was Mario Kart Double Dash for the GameCube, where every car held two players, and you could just be like the backseat one that just threw the banana peels.
Oh, okay. I never played that one either, but that sounds like in a similar light.
Yeah.
Both Mario games. It's almost like Nintendo knows that most households have a game player and then people that don't play games.
So my good and bad example of interaction was a card game I used to play in my childhood called Pit. Pit is a game where you just have like a suites of cards. I think a full set is 10 cards, and they just had things on them. In this case, it was like grains you were trading on the open market, and you would have to try to gain a full set by trading them blindly with other players by numbers. And it just created this manic environment where everyone's shouting out numbers and trading cards. And every time my family would get out and play it, it was just a ball. It was just a blast to play. So that's a good example, I think, of an interactive game. Now, on the other hand, the classic game Candyland has absolutely no interaction whatsoever with the other players. It doesn't matter if you're on the same spot as them on the board. There's no decisions to be made, no element of anything in the game other than sitting there and watching your pieces advance across the board.
Yeah, the only purpose that other players serve in Candyland is to decide who the winner is versus the loser.
Yeah, terrible game. Now, as we're continuing to examine these 10 things every game needs, I have this question when we come across a bad example like Monopoly or Candyland. Why do those games persist, and why are they so popular? Because that's one of the best-selling games of all time.
What, Monopoly or Candyland?
Candyland in this case.
Really? Huh. I don't know. Maybe it's just flavor and nostalgia, I would guess.
So can you have a game that's so strong in just one or two of the 10 things every game needs that it can overcome the fact that it doesn't have the other 8?
So I'm going to ignore your question and propose a hypothesis to you that addresses the root cause of this. And I believe, especially with board games, because people, if you don't realize this, that there are more board games than you think. Like just right now. Think of how many board games you think exist. Now, like, quintuple it, and there are more board games than that. And I think there is this barrier to most families where they think of board games as stuff like Monopoly or Candyland or chess or checkers. And, like, it's this very small subset of super popular games that kind of exist in the zeitgeist as quote-unquote board games. But if you take any time to look around, there are just so many board games that exist that are more complex or more deep or less so, or maybe just faster and more interactive. Like, there are so many different kinds of games that exist out there. I like to say that games are like wine. If you say you don't like games, that's only because you haven't found a game that you like yet. It exists, you just haven't found it. So I think maybe contributing to this idea that Candyland is so popular and Monopoly is so popular, despite them both being objectively bad games, is simply because those are the ones that are most well known for whatever reason.
Okay. Well, I looked through the list, and it does have goal, rules, inertia, surprise, and flavor. So, it's got half, I guess, what it doesn't have in the others, it makes up for in that one. And there's also just like the X factor of like nostalgia. People are like, oh, I remember that game from when I was a kid. I'll buy it for my kids.
Ugh. People do not buy games if they have only half of these 10 things, because there are board games that have all 10 in spades. Like, just buy a better game.
All right. Well, number 4 is a catch-up feature, which Candyland definitely doesn't have. There needs to be a way for players to fall behind if they've catch up. Because we've all had the experience. We've all had the experience where you're playing a game, maybe it's your first time, you just get hopelessly behind, and then it just feels like, why even try?
Yeah, that's a thing. Like, I only have negative examples. I feel like catch-up features, they're a double-edged sword, again, because on the one hand, if you are falling behind, it's more fun if you have the capacity to catch back up. But if you're ahead and you feel like you're ahead because you're making better decisions or you're objectively a better player than your opponents, and then the system arbitrarily rewards bad play, that just feels bad. And in this case specifically, I'm looking at you, Mario Party, because every time we play with my family, it's always fun and it's always a ball. But the back of my head, I'm like, I am destroying every other person in this room. Why is
the AI is kind of leveling it out.
Why is my son getting all of these welfare stars from the AI just for no reason? It's like, oh, you moved the most spaces. Yay, here, you get
That's
a star.
Exactly what this is.
Yeah, it's a catch-up feature.
It's a catch-up feature.
In this case, Mario Party is way too heavy-handed with it to the point where it annoys me, the objectively better player.
So another Mario game with this that's a classic is Mario Kart. You know, when you're racing like 4-player, if you're in the lead, you only get bananas and green stars, no matter what, from the question mark boxes. But if you're in the very back, you're getting stars and the notes and the blue shell.
Oh, hey, this is a thing that goes after the number 1 player in first place and takes out only them. It's like, if you're in last place, does taking out only the person in first place really do anything? No.
You're right.
Just super annoying.
The catch-up feature goes both ways. It can be it can help you if you're in that hopeless place where you feel like there's no possible way you'd be in it, but it could also be frustrating if you're in first place and it feels like, why even try, because the catch-up feature is just going to push me back down.
Right. Again, this is a fine line to walk, game developers. At your own risk.
So one example I thought of as a good one is Uno. You know, Uno, you could be like behind, but then you draw a wild draw 4 or something like that, and you can get right back in it.
That's true. And it also is, if you're playing with people that aren't Uno experts and they don't stack their hand a specific way, they could get stuck with a card that they just can't get rid of for a while. So Uno is good in that as you reduce the number of cards in your hand, the amount of cards that you can likely play also decreases.
Yeah, it's very natural that way. Some bad examples I thought of are like the game of life. It just has a terrible amount of inertia to it, so that there's really no good way to have a catch-up feature.
Hang on a second. I think that's entirely appropriate for the game of life, where if you fall behind early, likely you're going to be behind the entire game.
Now, on catch-up feature, I want to give an honorable mention to Monopoly and Risk. Risk, in particular, I'd mentioned to you because I'd had that from a long time ago, and it was just a classic game, and it was getting passed along, but it was lacking a catch-up feature, and it wasn't that fun to play, and I think they realized that in subsequent versions of it, they added a few catch-up features, and it made it more fun to play, and it fixed this problem. And anyone that's played Monopoly, and whenever you land on like sales tax or you pay $200 to get out of jail and you put it in the center of the board, and then if you land on free parking, you get the money, that's a catch-up feature.
Yes, not a part of the actual rules, but that is a catch-up feature that is almost universally accepted for the game Monopoly, because otherwise, and again, Monopoly sucks.
All right, so number 5 is inertia. Something that kind of forces the game to move along towards completion. Now, if you've ever played a game where it just feels like it's dragging on forever and it's never going to end, that's what your game is lacking, is inertia.
That's bad examples of this are easy. That's Monopoly and Risk again. Those games can just drag on forever. But probably the absolute worst that I've ever experienced is, Ben, have you ever played a game called Axis and Allies?
Yes. Yeah, absolutely. And I used to love that game for this reason, that it didn't have inertia. But we just had a friend and we'd set it up in his basement and we would go every day after school and have the same game going on for 2 weeks in a row.
Oh, yes. I remember being at the academy introduced to this game where it's 5 players. You have to have 5 players. And it's basically World War II. The beginning state of the game is pre-Pearl Harbor World War II, and then you just play out World War II. And we would play all day for like 3 days straight, and we would barely finish. You're talking 20 or 30 hours of gameplay just to get through one game. And that game, it was grueling.
Yeah, there really wasn't anything that gave it inertia. There kind of was. I mean, that's what the technology development was supposed to represent. Like, okay, somebody can develop nuclear weapons and force this thing to end.
But
they didn't have nuclear weapons as one of the technology you could develop.
No, it was like strategic bombing and like better artillery or something. Like, I don't know. Like it just like the features that you said that would hopefully close out the game only made it incrementally more fast, but most of the time it was just awful.
So my example of a bad inertia game was Scrabble. Because as you get towards the end, it just gets more complicated and harder to place tiles. And if you aren't like putting people on a timer, it just really drags out and it gets kind of boring.
Oh, I've never had that problem with Scrabble, Ben. Maybe you should read more books.
All right. Well, here's a game that very elegantly has a tremendous amount of inertia. Jenga.
Ooh, that is good. Jenga does have a great amount of inertia because as you progress in the game, it inevitably drives itself to the end. Yeah,
it just gets more and more tipsy-turvy and ready to fall, and it's exciting because of the inertia of it.
Oh, I'm gonna tell this every chance I get. My son, we were playing Jenga. He pulled it off. He did that thing where there was like 3 single middle bricks stacked on top of each other, and then he went, and it's technically against the rules because you can't touch it with more than one hand at the same time. But he flipped the piece out of the stack, and the whole stack just fell that one floor and stayed perfectly stable. And it was the most epic gaming moment my son has experienced in his life. It was awesome.
That's a great moment and a great example of Sanderson's zeroth rule. Like, yeah, it's against the rules, but it was awesome. So
I'll allow it.
It gets a pass. All right, number 6 is surprise.
And, I mean, that's self-explanatory. There should be things in the game that are unexpected.
Yeah, and most games introduce that through some element of randomness. You know, a shuffled deck of cards, some dice, some way that something unexpected can happen. And you love it. Even like we've been crapping on Risk, but the math of the die rolls of Risk make it so that you can win a hopeless battle sometimes, and that's always exciting when that happens.
Yeah, and people do like surprises, and people like rooting for the underdog. And if the game supports that happening, then that's a good thing. But again, it goes back to double-edged sword. Too much surprise, and it feels like you're just fighting against a random number generator, and it's impossible to beat.
Yeah, just random. So a couple of good examples I thought of this were Stratego. Have you ever played that game?
I just played Stratego with my son last weekend. And yes, I have played Stratego.
That's an excellent game that has a tremendous amount of surprise.
Yes, especially when my son doesn't conform to the you only put bombs around your flag rule, and he just scatters the bombs randomly around his board.
That made it hard for you, didn't it? Did you win?
I did, but only because there was one piece that he kept like reaching for, and he goes, oh, and then he didn't move it. It's like, I wonder which piece that is.
That's the flag.
Yeah.
Okay, so you figured out his tell. Battleship's another good example of a game that isn't really that great of a game, but because it's strong in one of these things that every game needs, it persists, and it definitely has a lot of surprise.
I agree with that. I don't know. I think Battleship conforms really well to a lot of these. There is inertia, inevitability. There's a catch-up feature in that eventually. Like, if you're falling behind, you get a bunch of your ships blown up. Well, there's fewer spots for your opponent to hit now. So, I think Battleship's just a good all-around example.
Okay. A bad example of surprise I put is Connect 4.
There's no surprises
in Connect 4? It's just all right there in front of you.
It's just tic-tac-toe. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yep.
I think
if you're being surprised by playing Connect 4, you're not thinking it through.
I think Point Salad doesn't have very much surprise. The only surprise that I ever experienced in Point Salad is when you actually add up the points at the end of the game and you keep losing to your 6-year-old kid.
Number 7 is strategy. And I like the way they pointed out that strategy is something that is related to replayability. That by playing it once and saying, okay, I saw what did and didn't work, I want to try it again and do something a little bit different. That's strategy.
Yeah, this is not strategy in that you need to form a complex plan while you're in the game. It's strategy in that as you gain more experience, you can get better at the game.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. So that made me think of some just classic games that just have no strategy whatsoever, like Hungry Hungry Hippos.
Just smash the hippos.
That's
fast
it.
As you can.
There's only one strategy. Or Chutes and Ladders. In England, they call it Snakes and Ladders. Have you played that quote unquote game?
Where you just roll dice, move your character, and hey, I got a ladder, or boo, I got a chute. Yeah, that game's stupid.
Yeah.
There's no point.
Yeah, exactly. It's missing so many of these things, and it definitely has no strategy.
None whatsoever.
You just roll a dice and watch your token move on the board.
Now, I would like to say that this strategy is something that a lot of modern video games have started to get really, really right. This has been a push in the industry ever since the game Dark Souls came out, so it's been around for a while now. But games are really starting to crank up the difficulty, as like they want to make things really, really challenging in these video games. But they still provide you with all the tools to be successful. It just takes patience and learning. And I'll tell you, Ben, like a great example is Hollow Knight, and it's one of my favorite video games right now. And when I first started playing it, man, it was hard. Like, it was super hard. I remember beating my head against the very first boss of the game. Her name's Hornet. And I must have, like, fought her 50 times before I finally barely eked out a win. But now I'm on my second or third playthrough, and I got to Hornet, and I beat her first try, no problem. I barely took one hit. And it's just because the game forces you to, like, get better and like, teach you the mechanics, and you really learn. And then the payoff is so good once you get to that level.
So let me give you a classic example. Harkening back to the NES games when Mega Man first came out. It was
Mega Man. I have wasted probably months of my life on Mega Man 3 when I was a kid.
Yeah, so Mega Man was a good example of strategy because it did something that had never been done before, and that's when you start the game, you saw this 3x3 grid of all the end bosses, and you could go to their world and try to defeat them. And they all gave you a power-up when you got to the end of the world, and there was this strategy element to it that if you got the right power-ups, that made it more effective for you to be able to go through the other worlds. Like, you could choose any one you wanted, but if you did it in the right order, then it was easier.
Yes, I think like the Cut Man or the Boomerang Man or whatever, when you got his weapon, was super effective against one of the other bosses, and that kind of, it was this,
the Bubble Man.
It was this rock paper scissor effect where if you knew the interactions, then you could reduce the difficulty by doing the sequence in the right order. And
they weren't always super obvious,
no,
or overwhelming.
No, you would think that Bubble Man would be, soft to Spike Man, but it wasn't necessarily the case.
Right. Yeah, so that was my example.
That's a good one.
Number 8 is fun. Now, this one's very subjective, but the way he defined it, he says, is, something that allows the players to enjoy themselves. And I think that's the reason some of these games persist that you and I might not think are fun, because they're fun to someone.
Yeah, no, there's a lot of good and bad examples. Well, there's a lot of good examples of fun, because typically fun games are the ones that are popular and get perpetuated through society. But I have played a handful of board games that just aren't fun, that I just did not enjoy.
Yeah, backgammon comes to mind. I've never played a good game of backgammon.
I've never played backgammon, and now I know to avoid it. Thank you for that.
Well, it's an old game, like chess, which I also have on my bad list. But somebody enjoys chess.
Chess can be fun. That's more of an interaction thing. It depends on who you're playing against. There's the bad examples I have come from predominantly the board game binge sessions that I do with my friends in Dallas every once in a while. And you came to one of those, I believe, or one or two of them, I believe. And there was one game I remember we were playing, like the whole group of everybody standing around this table and playing this super in-depth, like tabletop strategy game. And it was very hardcore and very flavorful. And you and I were just doing our own thing and not barely paying attention the entire time because it wasn't really fun.
Yeah. So when I was thinking of this one, I thought, what are the best times I've had playing games? And they were very situational. Like you said, with chess, you got to be playing against the right person. Like, for instance, I thought about the times I'd go on scout trips and we would play capture the flag in some unfamiliar place. And it would be like dark and we'd be creeping through the woods and there'd be surprise and strategy and inertia and flavor and a catch-up feature and adventure. And it was just fantastic. And it was like the best game I ever played in my life. When I deployed to Al Udeid back in 2007, every Friday night we used to take a projector into the conference room and set it up and network 2 Xboxes together and play 4-on-4 Halo.
Ooh, those are the best, yeah.
Oh man, we would bring in pizza and people would line up and it was just fantastic.
Do what games I don't find fun, Ben? Most team sports. Like, I don't think I've ever had fun playing
because some people
basketball.
find those really fun.
Yeah, some people live and thrive on those, but team basketball, soccer, like I have never enjoyed ever.
Yeah, and some people seem to be having the most fun when they're having the least fun. But like when I was in the UK, I joined the station soccer team, and I was easily the worst person on the field. But when we were just laughing and kicking it around, man, those were the best times.
I was in college. We were also forced to participate in intramural sports. You were required to be on an intramural team and participate 3 times a week. And I always tried to pick the sports that were the easiest to play because I didn't want to do it in the first place. And I remember going onto the volleyball team thinking, oh, volleyball's kind of fun, not realizing that for some reason my squadron's upperclassmen were super hardcore about, like, they were the volleyball intramural champions 3 years running and they were going to keep it going.
Over competitive and suck all the fun out of it.
I got to play half of one game before they benched me for the entire intramural season.
Volleyball is a game that I've had opposite ends of the spectrum on. Sometimes I've had the most fun I've ever had in a game playing volleyball, and sometimes I've had the least fun I've ever had in a game playing volleyball.
I think the only good version of volleyball is swimming pool volleyball, where you're floating around, it's cool out, and spiking is super easy.
Yeah. Yeah, and I've played volleyball where like they expect you to play a position so that even though you rotate, every time they blow the whistle, you're supposed to go back to your same spot.
Yeah,
you know what I'm talking about, like professional volleyball.
If you're like in a PE class, you're supposed to get to all the positions because that's what's fun. But if you're competitive, you stand right there and you do this one thing. You just set the ball. That's all you do.
Yeah. All right. Number 9 is flavor.
This is one of my favorite aspects.
We need to clarify what we mean by flavor, but flavor just means something you can kind of hang your hat on that's like the story element that goes along with the mechanics of the game.
So a lot of games can be completely divested of their flavor, and then you can break it down into just the raw mechanics. But that typically, especially for me, that removes a lot of the fun. For example, checkers and chess are games that have clear-cut rules and meet a lot of the other points of this list, but there's no flavor. There is no flavor to either of those games. Like there's
There kind of is with chess. You know, the pieces are named king and queen and bishop and rook and knight.
Yeah, but that's completely arbitrary. You can name those pieces.
But that's flavor.
But you can name the pieces whatever you want, and it doesn't change anything about the game. There's no story that's taking place. I understand what you're saying. There's a little bit there, more than checkers. But other games have like this entire... Like, they try to wrap up the goal and the rules and stuff into it. Like, Scythe is an excellent example. One of my favorite examples.
Diesel Punk.
One of my favorite board games of all time. It's a Diesel Punk game, and they went way out of their way to make everything, like, super flavorful and super artsy. Like, there's encounters on the board that when you flip them over, you pull from this giant deck of cards that have amazingly hand-drawn art of these, like, diesel mechs and... like standing in a field with a bunch of sheep. And it's just so cool to like, you really feel like you're participating in this post-World War I mechanized society.
Yeah. So some other bad examples I had for flavor were Scrabble and Connect 4. You know, it's just, like you said, just stripped down to the mechanics.
Yeah, you really hate
no
Connect
flavor
4,
whatsoever. I like Connect 4. And I like pointing out that it doesn't need flavor to be a successful game. You can still have the other elements because I've had a lot of fun playing Connect 4.
You see, I'm a story guy. Like, I really want my games to have a lot of flavor. And this is one of the reasons that you and I disagree on Magic a lot of the time, is stupid stuff like you can't even remember the names of these cards and what the art is. You just remember what the card does, and it drives me nuts. Like, you don't even recognize.
You're right. I strip the flavor out and just go down to the mechanics.
Yeah, you do. Like, one of the coolest things about War of the Spark, which is a set that was for Magic the Gathering, is that they told the entire story arc of what happened during that set in like 10 or 12 of the cards. You could line them all up, and in the art and the flavor text, it showed exactly what happened as the story progressed, and you just don't care. I've tried to send you that article pointing that out several times. You're like, I'm not going to read it.
All right. Well, then I don't always need flavor for a game to be successful for me. Well, sometimes it's not important, like the game Candyland, oozing with flavor, literally. It's got cutesy names, they rhyme, unforgettable little art and pictures and colors. It's all flavor and no substance.
And as we all know from, food, if you have all flavor and no substance, that's just bad for you.
Now, on the other hand, the game Clue has a ton of flavor. And if you just took the mechanics of that and took it out, it would be confusing and hard to do. But because of the idea that you're this group of strangers that are invited to this mysterious mansion and there's been a murder and you're investigating the murder, all of the rules that you have to follow kind of naturally flow from that. And it makes it really easy to play.
Yeah.
And the flavor is a strength.
That is an excellent example of a game with good flavor, because there is not a person on this planet that has played a game of Clue and didn't go, I have an accusation to make, and like stood up and made it a big production.
That's right. And you understand it. Can you imagine if you took the game of Clue and stripped it of its flavor, and you're like, okay, so you're going to have all these pieces on the board, and you got to find two pieces that match, and they're in that hidden envelope over there, and you got to move around until you figure out what three pieces are in that envelope over there, and then you got to tell everyone else. And you're like, what? Yeah, now?
It's essentially you have to solve a logic puzzle, and there are clues scattered around the board. Roll dice until you get enough clues to solve the puzzle.
Right.
Yeah, that sounds boring.
Yeah, it's terrible.
Yeah, but
when you get a bunch of people together and you're talking in funny accents and it's all flavor.
Yeah, but saying that it was A and X is not nearly as cool as it was Colonel Mustard in the library with the wrench.
Which brings us to number 10, a hook. The hook is like the thing that grabs you about the game.
Yes, and this can be deceptively simple or super complex. And like I love that the hook can be so many different things. And like, for example, like we were just talking about Clue, like the hook there is murder. This is a game about murder. And it says on the box, a game about murder. And then for Scythe, the box almost says nothing on the front. It says Scythe, but there is this gorgeous giant painting of, like I said, this flock of sheep and farmers just going about their day, and giant mechanized diesel war machines fighting it out in the background. Just the dichotomy and the juxtaposition of those two things just draws you in. Like, what is this?
Yeah, now this is one where I'm going to say Monopoly is got it. There is that hook.
What? Oh, you're going to have to sell me on this one.
It's right in the name, You're going to be a businessman and you're going to be successful. So successful that you control everything.
I don't like it. I don't buy it either. Monopoly's terrible. Hate it.
I think you're using your bias against the game Monopoly to say that it doesn't have a hook.
Oh, I'm thinking about the box art. I'm thinking about what about Monopoly, if I knew nothing about it, is going to draw me in to want to play this game. And
I think that's why you can go anywhere in the world and find a localized version of Monopoly. You can get University of Florida Monopoly. You can get Disneyland Monopoly. You can get McDonald's Monopoly.
Ugh. That's just corporate on top of corporate, man. McDonald's Monopoly. Hey, we heard you liked corporate greed, so we put some more corporate greed in your corporate greed.
Yeah. But like you said, the tagline that was on the box, like on Clue, it says a game about murder. Whatever that tagline is, that's your hook. What does it say on the box to draw you in?
Well, that's not always the hook can be different for different people too. Like what draws you? What makes you come back and play this thing? Like what is the hook for Magic the Gathering? For me, I really love the my ability to express myself in all these different ways, or the fact that it's so large and open that there is just a simple stated goal and a billion different ways to accomplish it. Just that ability of freedom that I have to play the game really hooks and keeps me coming back to it.
It's funny, I would express what I think is the same fundamental thing, but in a different way for me, and that is that it's the oldest and most successful collectible trading card game.
That's your hook that's what keeps you coming back to Magic? Is that because...
It's what would get me in.
I see.
Like, if I want to try this genre of things, I want to try the King.
Okay, that makes sense. I can get behind that. Have you ever played a game called Dominion?
Yes, I love that game.
Dominion is fantastic, and I think my parents have my set. Shame on you, parents, for keeping my set.
How many upgrades have you? How many expansions do you have?
I haven't checked recently, but I have all of them through Dark Ages. So like almost all of them.
Okay, so Dominion is a deck building game, but it's much more self-contained than Magic the Gathering.
Yes.
It's similar with some of the mechanics, but it's a bit less expansive.
But it has the same kind of hook for me specifically, in that it has a simple set of rules. It's easy to teach somebody to play it, but there are so many different sets, and you sit down and you randomly select 10 stacks of cards every game, which completely changes it. So the replayability of Dominion is absolutely through the roof, and that's what hooks me about that game.
The thing that hooked me about Dominion is the strategy element of it. That when you play it, you can see a road to victory, but you think, oh, I could try it differently next time.
Well, assuming that you even have the same stack of 10 cards. I never like playing the same stack of 10 2 times in a row.
See, sometimes I like playing the same stack about 2 or 3 times so that you can kind of try to develop the best strategy for that particular stack.
Interesting. Now, I like to mix it up every time. I want to be making decisions on the fly.
Interesting. That's because we get different things out of games. All right, so now that we've introduced all 10 for the last couple of minutes, I want to just pick a few that maybe we haven't talked about and kind of analyze them against these 10.
Okay.
So one that my family brought up is the game Twister. What do you think of the game Twister against these?
What do I think of the game Twister?
It has a goal. It has rules.
It does have a goal. It's got rules. It has good player interaction. Obviously, the interaction is through the roof.
Interaction. Is there a catch-up feature?
I don't know. I don't know if there is a catch-up. If you're losing in Twister, you just fall down and then you're out, right? Like there is not really a middle state where you. No,
there's no catch-up feature. If you're like trapped over in the corner and bent over backwards and got your leg crossed through your arms, you're just screwed.
Yeah. Inertia. Eventually somebody's going to fall down, unless you're Spider-Man.
There's kind of a surprise.
I think there's surprise, especially like you're talking about. Like Twister is the game that you play when you're, middle teenage years with boys and girls at a party. There could be a lot of surprise there.
Yeah. There's strategy and fun. It's I don't know if it has flavor. It's just
I don't
Twister.
know, Ben. It says it right on the box, Twister, and like you get pretty twisted up. That's
the hook.
Yeah, you think that is? No, the hook is every boy is going to try to play it with girls. I think that's the hook.
Yeah, it's unique in the space of games in that respect. It is the game where you're going to get down on the floor and get uncomfortably close to other people.
Do you own a copy of Twister, Ben?
I probably 3. How about you?
No, we do not own Twister, but there's only 4 of us, and I'm absurdly tall, and my wife is not very tall, so it wouldn't.
That's the thing about having 6 kids. There's just this golden age of where like the smallest kid's big enough to play, and you can get like 4 to 6 kids on the mat, and it's hilarious as a parent. And you're like, you pretend you're spinning it, but really you're looking at them and figuring out which one you need to say.
Okay, that right there, you just sold me. That's the hook for Twister. I get to manipulate my kid's physical position in space. I enjoy that.
Okay, how about have you played Ticket to Ride?
I have played Ticket to Ride. This game is one of the very first like non-standard board games that I successfully introduced to my parents. And
yeah, it's just low enough complexity that you can give it to non-complex board game players.
There's one of the biggest strengths that Ticket to Ride has. And if you've never played Ticket to Ride, listeners, I encourage you to try it because it is really a great game. I actually wrote about this a bit I put up an article about board games as well on our Bad at Magic page about how to introduce board games to non-board game people. And
so if people want to see that article, you would go to badatmagic.live and click on the link at the end and go to Josh's random thoughts.
Ben gets $1 every time he plugs the website. Ticket to Ride is very successful and very good to introduce to new people that aren't traditionally into board games because it has very short turn lengths. So like, even if like you're new to board games, you're not like big on the fun or whatever. Yes, it is strategic, but your individual turn doesn't take very long. So even if you're not like into board games, you're not waiting around to do anything for very long. Like the other players take their turns very quickly, and then you get to do stuff again, and that's exciting and fun.
You've mentioned that before, and I like that one enough. I'm giving it an honorable mention against these 10 things. Short turn length is a good way for a multiplayer game to be accessible to new players.
Yeah, and like we talked about Axis and Allies earlier in this podcast.
Yeah, you can have interminable turns on Axis and Allies.
It is very normal for one player's turn to last upwards of an hour in Axis and Allies.
So you're sitting there for 4 hours waiting for one turn.
And it's awful. So having short turn lengths, like Scythe, one of my favorite games, the game looks very complex and there's a lot you can do, but your turn doesn't usually take more than like 2 minutes.
Yeah, so back to Ticket to Ride, you're just trying to build train connections between cities on a map, and you have secret objectives that you're trying to achieve and get the most points, but everyone's scores are out there in the open so you can see who's winning and who's not. But it's got would you say it has a catch-up feature?
Does Ticket to Ride have a catch-up feature? I think it does, in that the person that's typically to win, you have to get more points, and you get more points by building longer railroads. The problem is, to build the longer ones, you have to spend more turns collecting cards, and there's a higher risk that
so you could just kind of catch up at the end by building a long route.
You can catch up by deconflicting yourself from the other players. You can catch up by achieving the secret objectives, more of those than the other players are. You can strategically block certain paths if you can figure out where your opponents are trying to go. Like, there's a lot of things that you can do to interact with the players to make it feel like even if you're behind, that you could always catch up.
It's got good interaction. It scales well for number of players. I've had some good times playing it. Definitely a good game.
I will never forget the time we played Ticket to Ride, and I think it was my mother that bought both of the one-track links between two of the Midwestern routes, and everyone else had to go like 2 states over just to get to like the next city, and everyone was so mad at her for taking both of those routes.
Yeah. I second your endorsement of that game. Another one I mentioned before, Risk and Monopoly, that have kind of had changes to fix some of the weakness of them. Another one that I think is inherently a flawed game that's also very popular is Trivial Pursuit. Now, Trivial Pursuit is the classic like trivia game where just you get around with a bunch of players and you try to answer questions and win. And there's more fun trivia games out there, but it's the quintessential one. Now, it has a lot of weaknesses in like that there isn't a lot of interaction. There isn't much of a catch-up feature. It doesn't have a lot of inertia. And those 3 things in particular just really drag down the classic game. But I mentioned once on the podcast, I'll tell you again, I stumbled across a version of Trivial Pursuit that was so good I went out and bought it. And it's called Trivial Pursuit Bet You Know It. Do you remember me talking about this?
I think I remember talking about it a little bit. But please, for the listeners, go again.
Basically, every time you land on one of the colored squares, then something happens where the rest of the players playing the game will make a bet based on that person. Do I think they can answer a question about history? And then they place a bet on the board with some chips that they have. And then if they get it right, you double your bet and you get more chips. And if they get it wrong, whatever, either they get the chips or you get the chips. And then the chips have a monetary value that you can use to skip a category if it's a hard category for you, or buy a piece if you need to get one to complete your set. And that constitutes a catch-up feature, and it gives the game a lot more inertia than it used to have. And it also gives you interaction when on other players' turns, when otherwise you'd just be sitting around listening to someone else answer trivia questions. And so it takes Trivial Pursuit and makes it exciting and fun. It's so good.
That's funny that we had this game that was so common for the longest time in Trivial Pursuit. And it's almost like someone sat down and was like, you know what the problems with Trivial Pursuit are? They're these, and we can fix it with this. And it sounds like that's what they did.
Yeah. Those are pretty much all the ones they had. Did you have any others you wanted to examine in light of these rules?
So I'm going to go back to video games, because these 10 rules, I think, apply not just to board games, and we talk a lot about board games and card games and things, but video games too. So I'm going to say 2 games from the same genre, from the same intellectual property. And one of them is a good example, one of them is a bad example. And the first one is a bad example, and that is probably my favorite game of all time, and that was the original, the OG Legend of Zelda on NES. Did you ever play that, Ben?
Yes, I did, and it was revolutionary at the time, so it's hard not to view it with a bit of presentism and apply current standards to it.
Well, it was the very first home cartridge video game that had a save function, because there was a battery built into the cartridge to maintain the memory, like the memory chips inside of the cartridge. And because of that, it is a huge collector's item. And I think an original unopened Legend of Zelda NES cartridge just sold at auction a couple of days ago for $870,000.
Yeah, wow.
Anyway, but this is a bad example of a game because the goals were not very clear. Like you're supposed to like get the pieces of this thing, but you didn't really know why unless you read the 20-page manual that came with the book. There was no clear direction. There was just a big open map you had to go.
They were going for the open world thing, but you're right. They weren't good enough at kind of providing a bit of guidance as to what order to find the first and, how to figure out where the dungeons are and stuff.
Right. The rules were clear because, you fight monsters and they kill you. There was zero interaction because it's a one-player game. There is no catch-up feature. If you fall behind, it's just a snowball into terribleness. It has bad inertia because you are the only thing that's pushing this game to its end. The game will happily
you could just roam around indefinitely and never make progress.
And that happened to a lot of people because the 8th and final dungeon was hidden underneath a random bush on a random screen of the game, and you had to burn the bush with a specific magical item. So if you just didn't know that, then there was absolutely no chance that you would ever find 8th dungeon and finish the game. You just wouldn't.
Yeah, there's so many games I'm thinking of, like when you play Ski Free on Windows 95 and the Yeti would come along and chase you down the mountain. So many games just have something is like, all right, hurry up. You're taking too long. Move along.
Yeah, it's over now.
And you can see even Zelda figured this out when you had like Majora's Mask and the moon was going to crash into the earth in 3 days.
And
talk about inertia.
I was actually going to bring up Ocarina of Time as a good example of all of these things. Because that was...
Well,
go ahead. Sorry.
Well, let's finish dirting on the original one.
So surprise for the original Zelda. There was some surprise. Got to give it props for that. If you blew the magic whistle on this screen instead of that screen, then something could happen. Like there was one where there was a little pond that you'd been to 100 times, but if you did a specific thing there with a specific item, it would drain the pond and that would open up one of the dungeons. Again...
Yeah, I remember those surprises being so good back in the day when the only way to find out about them was to share them on the playground at school and be like, dude, you'll never believe what happened last night.
Yeah, those are good surprises. Strategy, do you get better as you play it more? The more you play it, the more you learn the different bad guys and their patterns and things. I thought it was fun. And it was, again, the first open world game that really existed. And I thought that was just awesome. It felt like an adventure going out and just exploring and discovering things. The flavor was amazing. From the very first thing that happens in that game is also the flavor and the hook sets for me so hard. If the first screen opens up and there's a cave like 2 squares away from you, and you inevitably go into the cave, and there's an old man and he gives you a sword and it just says, "It's dangerous to go alone.
It's dangerous. Go alone. Take this."
Yeah, and you get the sword and you hold it above your head triumphantly, and like it's just, oh yes. I'm on an adventure. I'm on a quest. I am alone. I have a sword. It's me against the world, baby.
All right, so give us a rundown on Ocarina of Time. So Ocarina of Time came out. They were kind of spreading their wings in 3D world for the Nintendo 64. It was like you'd taken this 2D adventure and gone into the third dimension, and all of a sudden Hyrule was this wonderful, magical place to be explored. But they'd introduced some handrails that kind of fixed some of these 10 things.
Yes, and so just the fact that it was newer technology, they had much more space and much more technology to do a lot more explaining. So your goals are laid out at the beginning. There are NPCs that are explaining the things that are happening to you.
Non-player characters for the layperson.
Yeah, there's... my bad. There are people or animals or things in the game that will stop and talk to you and show little movie clips of things that are happening and
tell you a story.
Yeah, they're giving you
tell you who the bad guy is and why he's threatening you and what you need to do about it.
Deliver you your motivation, your goals, the flavor, all given to you at specific times when you need it. The rules, again, are clear. There's bad guys. There's you. Fight to survive. Interaction, it's bad on interaction. It's only a one-player game. Sorry, I play one-player games.
And which makes the catch-up feature irrelevant.
Yeah, kind of. Yeah. Again, it can snowball. I heard.
So how did Ocarina of Time? Oh, go ahead.
I have heard that if you were lacking specific things in the game, that the artificial intelligence was more likely to generate those things for you. But I'm not sure if that was that game or a later version of it.
Huh.
For inertia, again, everything that you do in the game is driving you towards the end, is achieving the objective of defeating the big bad guy. And this was one of the first games where they introduced a hint feature. Now, the problem in this specific game is that they made it unsolicited. If you weren't making specific progress towards the next step of the adventure, every couple of minutes...
Navi the fairy would come out and go, hey, listen!
Hey, listen! That is still my text message noise. Like, whenever I get a text message, my phone goes, hey, listen! And people, by the end of that game, hated the voice of that fairy because they were unsolicited hints. Navi, I understand I need to go to the farm. I don't want to. I am making the deliberate decision to do this other side thing. Leave me alone.
I am over here chopping down these bushes and breaking these pots.
Yes, I have my own goals outside of yours, Navi. Now stop pestering me. She turned into a real nag. They removed that.
Yeah, but do you know how great Navi the fairy would have been in the first Zelda when you're like wandering around trying to get to the end of the game and can't find out where to go?
Well, and this is why Navi the fairy was an important milestone in video game history, because it was unsolicited hints, and that's when the industry learned, players do want hints, but only when the player asks for them. And so now most modern games, especially open world games, will have some mechanism where you can go find hints and you know where to find them. For example, Hollow Knight. There is this old man that sits in the starting town at the beginning of the game. And whenever you go talk to him, he will give you basically what is the next step of your adventure should be. And it's a subtle hint and little drive to push you in the direction if you need that.
Okay.
Surprise, there was...
I didn't always find it that obtrusive. I just feel like, okay, that's what I got to do next.
Surprise, there's a ton of surprise in that game. If for no other reason than they did it on purpose. Like Ocarina of Time, I'll never forget the first time I went into the Temple of Time and pulled the Master Sword out of this dais, which is the size of your character at the time, because you're playing as like this 10-year-old kid. And then you get blasted forward through time until you're like an 18-year-old adventuring master. Like, that was just so cool to me.
Yeah, it was also not the first, but one of the first where like there's this big reveal where one mysterious character reveals that there's someone else. And yeah.
Oh, yes, where this ninja that's been dropping you hints throughout the game turns out actually to be the princess in disguise. That was solid.
Yes.
Oh, spoilers for Ocarina of Time, everybody. Sorry. Strategy, like any game, especially the three-dimensional games, like the more you play, the better you're going to get. Fun, I had a ton of fun playing that game. There was a lot of cool little features. Like, I remember the hook shot. Once you figured out that the hook shot will connect and pull you towards anything that has the wood texture in the game, any polygon that looks like wood, you can pull yourself towards. That just opens up so many possibilities of messing around.
Yeah. Tons of flavor.
Oh, yeah.
Like being able to get on a horse and ride around Hyrule. That felt like the hook to me. Like, you already know you love Zelda games, but this is like the Zelda game to a whole nother power.
Oh, yeah. And there's... like, this technology was so cool. It's like just coming out. It was the very first 3D open world kind of feeling game. And the ability to, like, play a little song on your keys, and not just like it is now where you hit a button and like an animation plays. No, you had to actually like remember the sequence of buttons to play the correct song, and it would summon your horse. Like, your horse would just come galloping in from off screen. That was so cool.
Yeah, it almost made it feel like you were, and the controller was so exotic, it almost made it feel like you were really learning to play a musical instrument.
You were not. I do not know how to play an ocarina for real, but it did feel that way.
Yeah, and you're right. This game just had fun in spades. I remember just enjoying the heck out of this game, and if I was going to get a tattoo,
he said, knowing full well that I have the Hyrulean crest on my shoulder like a Legionnaire's tattoo in ancient Rome.
I don't think we've revealed that yet in the podcast. Yeah, we teased it a while back, and there was a discussion broke out on Facebook over it, but I don't think we'd actually revealed it.
Did we never tell everybody? Well, everybody that actually survived through this 2-hour rant about random games.
You made it to episode 50. You now know that Josh's tattoo is the Hyrulean crest from Legend of Zelda Ocarina of Time.
It's on my left shoulder, and it's amazing, and I love it every time I see
it. Awesome. Well, those are the 10 things every game needs. A goal or goals, rules, interaction, a catch-up feature, inertia, surprise, strategy, fun, flavor, and a hook. And we will refer to those going forward. I'll add them to the Bad at Magic vocabulary, and we will use them in future episodes.
Awesome. Well, everybody, thanks for listening to the Bad at Magic podcast. We're glad that you decide to join us every couple of weeks when we put these episodes out. If you like what we talk about, maybe share us with a friend. That's the best way we can get the word out and help spread the joy. If you really, really like us, then please consider taking your phone out of your pocket and giving us a good rating on the podcast player of your choice. It's amazing the kind of visibility we get from that. And then if you just can't get enough of us, if you want to hear Ben talk about random board games until the end of time, then consider becoming a patron on our Patreon page.
And totally endorse all that. Two announcements I'd like to make. One is that on the next episode, Josh and I are going to be reviewing The Hobbit by J.R.R. Tolkien. So if you haven't read it in a while and you want to be read up before you join in on the discussion, pick up The Hobbit and give it a read. And also, because episode 52 will be the 2-year anniversary of the Bad at Magic podcast, as a kind of a celebration, I'd like to have a little giveaway. So here's how giveaway is going to work. When I left Florida, my hotel manager gave me 3 $25 gift certificates to Cheesecake Factory. So I have 3 gift cards sitting around. I figured rather than use them myself, I could give them away to listeners. So here's how I'm going to pick the winners for these 3 gift cards. If you are, go to Facebook and go to the Bad at Magic Facebook page, you can... there's a link in the show notes, or you can go there directly and click like on our page. And if you have liked the Bad at Magic Facebook page, then I have your name in a list. And on episode 52, we'll do a random drawing of 3 listeners. I'll read your name out, and then we will. I'll send you an instant message and get your address and mail you one of these gift cards.
Outstanding. So I mean, there. If you needed some kind of motivation to join us on our social media platforms, Ben does an excellent job keeping our Facebook page up to date. We have a Reddit discussion every episode at Reddit/r/Bad-at-Magic. I don't know. Do we have any other social medias, Ben?
No, I think we tried to get like a Twitter or something at one time, but I'm just not into that. So you can join us on Facebook or Reddit, or go to our website. And until next time, may become a little less bad at magic.